Yes, you can say, well, don't take the photos, don't send the photos. You can say that, but in reality, that's such a normal part of being young today, being in relationships today.
He would take some photos that had intimate visual material on them, but he would also pair those with regular photos from like her Facebook page. That way it clearly identified here's who she is, and it was very much a targeted campaign to attack her.
I can't believe this is happening. I don't know what to do.
Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. Today, we're going to speak to someone who had her privacy violated in the worst possible way. Someone posted intimate photos of her on the web, and that act has had a profound effect on her life. They call it revenge porn. And the good news for the person you're about to meet is she took the case to court and won. Joining me now is her attorney, Kenton Hutcherson, with Hutcherson Law in Dallas, and his client, whom we're going to address as Jane Doe. Thank you both for joining us. We address you as Jane Doe because in the filing, Jane Doe is not your real name, correct? You put that name in the filing to protect your privacy.
Right.
Is there a little bit of irony in that your privacy has been violated, as we were just talking about? But when you go to court, you get to protect it at least a little bit.
Yeah, that's it ends up being kind of funny in that way, I guess.
I mentioned in the intro that you won this legal case. Talk to me just a little bit about what is it like, because this has been going on for years for you. Mm-hmm. What is it like to have taken this to court and won? What is it like to have a jury say, hey, you're right?
Honestly, the biggest thing for that for me was the validation that what happened to me was wrong and that it wasn't my fault. And there's like a very clear arrow pointed, I guess, at someone else instead of me. There's like a lot of kind of an internal battle, I think, with, okay, how could this have been my fault? How could this, but honestly, going to court and having the verdict turn out the way that it did, I think the validation was the biggest thing for me.
Do you actually go through that? I mean, people who end up the victims of something such as this, did you question yourself at some point?
Yeah, no, of course. I think it's easiest to find blame in myself. It makes me question like my own choices, you know what I mean? As in, like, I trusted this person and then I find out this happens and I kind of go back and hindsight is 2020.
It occurs to me that there's violations on numerous levels here, right? It's a violation of your privacy, which is what Kenton argued, but it's also a huge violation of your trust in someone who, the offender in this case was your then boyfriend.
Right.
Okay. Is that the biggest thing, the violation of trust, or is it hard to rank them?
I mean, the trust is the first thing that comes to mind because I found out about this and, I've since tried to have different relationships, you know what I mean? Or I have a boyfriend now. And so after having gone through that and then trying to find a relationship with a new person, like I couldn't help but think about, okay, am I making a mistake by putting my trust in someone else? Do they just want to use me? Like who wants to use me and for what? And it's even just, I don't know. I think once I went through something like that, it doesn't matter who it is. If it's someone I'm looking to have a relationship with or a friendship with, I just think about all the ways that whoever it is wants something from me. So I think that's the first thing that kind of comes to mind as far as like a direct result from that is, I mean, how do you know when to trust someone and how do you trust yourself to be able to make that decision to trust other people again or let people into your life or, whatever it might be.
So when you talk about that in the terms that you just did with respect to your current relationship, this happened beginning, you found out, going back to 2017. Now here we are 5 years later. It's still having an effect on you. Do you think you'll ever get to the point where it no longer has an effect on you?
I mean, honestly, probably not, because there's always the possibility. And in my mind, like when I think about it, what happened, these like images of me being on the internet, my information being on the internet attached to these images is bound to pop up again at some point. And so I don't think I'll ever feel truly rid of it, because I don't know if it'll ever, like, it would never go away anyway.
I mentioned at the top, and Kenton, I want to bring you into this discussion, and please feel free to jump in whenever you wish. But Jane won her legal case. We're having this discussion and recording this prior to the court entering a judgment. But can you tell me about the verdict that the jury brought back on her behalf?
Sure. So we had our jury trial in November, and the jury came back with a verdict in Jane Doe's favor. We had two claims that were asserted. The first one was under the Texas Relationship Privacy Act, which is commonly known as revenge porn. The second one was invasion of privacy, and they have different elements. The jury found in our favor on both, and awarded $125,000 in damages on both claims. And so right now, we have filed a motion for entry of judgment on the verdict. The defense has filed a motion for judgment notwithstanding the verdict, basically saying that the verdict should not be turned into a judgment. And so the court, we had argument last week in court, and the judge is taking the various motions under advisement, and has indicated that we should get a decision by the end of this week.
And just to be clear for people who are listening, you two took this to court. The result you're talking about is in a civil case, not in a criminal one.
Correct. Right. Now, under the Texas Relationship Privacy Act, there are both criminal and civil avenues that you can pursue. And so what we do is, as civil attorneys, we can handle the civil aspect. We can also talk to the police and help them and help, facilitate a criminal claim. In this case, Jane Doe talked to the police herself, and really there wasn't much that was achieved that way. But the good thing is that Texas allows a civil avenue so that you can still go to court, you can still get injunctive relief, you can still get, meaning that you can get an order from a court saying that whoever did this has to stop and has to take action to remove all the content from the internet. And you're also entitled to recover damages.
And the verdict that they came back with, I think you mentioned, was $250,000 in total. Are there a lot of these cases that are taken to court as you took Jane's case to court?
There aren't very many that have gotten to the point of trial. Revenge porn is still a relatively new phenomenon. The sad thing is it's pretty widespread. I saw a study from a few years ago that said that roughly 1 in 20 people are victims of revenge porn. So like 5%. So if you just think, do you know 20 people, right? One of them has been a victim. And I think the nature of the offense is such that the victim feels shame and they don't know what to do. And so most of these incidents probably don't progress into a lawsuit. So I imagine it's a very small percentage that do. The Texas legislature has enacted laws covering this because it's not the victim's fault. Sharing intimate materials within an intimate relationship is fairly common, and it's fairly new given the iPhone generation that we live in now. If you do that, you should not, that trust should not be abused, and the law is there now to protect that.
Is Texas one of the few states that has this sort of a revenge porn law, to use the colloquial term?
To be honest, I don't know the exact number. There's I want to say between 15 and 20 states that have these laws. They are all relatively new. And so a lot of states are trying to move forward to enact these laws. Before Texas had enacted its law, the way that we pursued these types of cases was purely under an invasion of privacy claim. Because it still is an invasion of privacy. Now, it doesn't give you the same protections as the statute. The statute has a lot of teeth to it that a general invasion of privacy claim doesn't have. But in any state where this is happening, you at least ought to be able to pursue a claim under invasion of privacy. Hopefully, they also have a revenge porn statute specifically addressing the issue.
Jane, Kenton mentioned this happened in the context of an intimate relationship, girlfriend, boyfriend, right?
Yes.
I know that your privacy's been violated, and I don't want to be guilty of doing that again. So tell me if I am. But in general terms, Can you talk to us about how the photos came about?
Yeah. So we dated for a total, I'd say on and off of 3 years, just under 3 years. And that was a pretty regular part of our relationship for a couple of reasons. One of them was because we were long distance. So like I lived in Arkansas and he was in Texas. He was living in Dallas. We met through a mutual friend. And so when I was visiting her, and that's why, when we ended up getting together, it was like a summer break and we went our separate ways. And that was kind of one way to keep kind of that like intimacy there without being around each other physically. But another thing, so I mean that part of it was pretty organic. There was also a part of it where there was some pressure put on me to maintain that once it started. And, this is like over a few years. So it kind of developed into this situation of like asking for them or pressuring me or expecting, I guess, like a certain type of photo or whatever it might be.
Did it ever occur to you? I mean, this is your boyfriend, right? This is somebody whom you trust. Mm-hmm. In the moment, did it ever occur to you that these could get out?
Honestly, I didn't think about it that way because it was my boyfriend. I don't know. I just didn't really think about it in that way. I didn't think he was going to be posting it if we ever did break up, which, that was never my thought was, we'll break up eventually. But I never thought it was going to happen that way.
There's a moment reading the legal filing where I believe you get a Facebook message.
Yes.
From somebody. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time you learn of this. Can you tell us about that?
So when I first discovered that they were online, one of my really good friends had messaged me on Facebook and had said, like, hey, I need to talk to you. And so I got off work and called him, and he told me that there were photos of me on this website, and that did I know that they were on online. And of course I had no idea. And we both knew who was posting them because it wasn't like everyone had access to that. There's one person who had access to the photos, and it was my boyfriend at the time. So, and I think I had found out, I think they were up on for maybe either the same day that they got posted, he saw them, or like maybe a day or two later. There were photos of me, but it wasn't just me in a, compromising position. It's that attached to what was at one point my Facebook profile or photos from my Instagram. And all of that wrapped up really nicely with where I went to university, what my name is. And it was enough to where at one point I had a stranger reach out to me on Facebook to let me know that these photos were on this website. Hey, here's a link. I know this is you. There's all the information right there. And so seeing that, knowing what people on the internet are saying, like, oh, I wish I could, and they have all the information, there's a real like threat of feeling unsafe, feeling violated, feeling all of those things. And so I think it's something that everyone should really, should take that seriously, because you never know what people can do with that information.
What goes through your mind when at that point in time, I don't think we mentioned this yet, you used to work as a school teacher, correct?
Right.
Were you working as a school teacher when these photos became public?
Yes.
What goes through your mind when that happens and you've got a friend who's warning you, but you're on the phone and...
Well, the first thing is there's a lot of crying and like, I don't know honestly where to even start because my mind is just shooting like one thought to another thought to another thought. It's like, okay, first of all, I can't believe this is happening. I don't know what to do. So, and then I'm upset because I know who it is that's posting this. It's my boyfriend, so I'm upset about that. And just the fact that they're out there. And then a little bit later is when I start thinking, okay, well, I have to go to work tomorrow. I work with children. So the thought of, but I mean, they're in middle school, so they all have phones, they all have access to the internet. And the thought that if my friend can find, can see them and attach these photos to me because of the information that's with them almost instantly after they're posted, then is that happening with my students as well? Like, what am I about to walk into if I go to work tomorrow and my students or my coworkers or my, boss has seen them? So there's pretty much panic, like, on all fronts.
It occurs to me, hearing you describe it, it sounds like one of those nightmare moments where we all sit bolt upright in bed and we go, oh, thank God that was a dream. Mm-hmm. Only yours is not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think the first thing I did was I just immediately started, I'm crying, really, really crying. Like, I just can't even form a complete thought about what's happening because it's like, I'm not in a space where I can really think anything through. I just am shocked and panic, distraught, whatever you want to call it.
Kenton, you've worked with people like Jane before who've had photos, explicit photos of themselves posted for various reasons. So you start to investigate at some point in time. I'm shortening the timeline a little bit,
sure.
But you start to investigate. What do you find in terms of numbers of photos that are out there and numbers of websites that they're on?
Sure. So we had found roughly 200 web pages that had some of these photos on them. There were multiple photos. The defendant in this case had created multiple collages of photos. And so he would take some photos that had intimate visual material on them, but he would also pair those with regular photos from like her Facebook page. That way it clearly identified, here's who she is, here are the intimate photos. That was something that he did. And some of them were very clear in terms of identifying her. There were postings that identified where she went to school, her university. And it was very much a targeted campaign to attack her.
You used that word in your filing more than once, a campaign.
Right.
This is not somebody who just went, whoops, with his phone and, oh, gee, oh, my.
Right.
This was, don't let me put words in your mouth. This is an intentional act over and over and over again.
Right. So what we saw is over time, you would see some initial postings with some certain photos posted at the beginning of the campaign. And then, of course, anybody that sees that can copy that and repost it somewhere else. But what we found was later on, there were additional postings on other web pages that had photos that had not been published before. And so that means the conclusion that we draw from that is that the defendant had selected some photos to publish and then went back to the internet, posted additional photos to cause additional harm, and did that multiple times. And so what that suggests is that it wasn't just a one-time instance of publishing certain content and then having it just propagate through the internet. It was a deliberate effort over time to harm Jane Doe.
He did this multiple times over a period of years.
Correct.
And you find out at some point, I believe after you break up, tell me if I'm incorrect, that he actually had been posting these while you were still dating.
Right. When I first discovered that there were any photos on the internet, we had already been broken up. So we had been broken up for, I think, maybe 6 months. I hadn't spoken to him, seen him, anything. I went back and tried to look for more photos, and I find postings that were made while we were still together. So a year before I discovered them for the first time. So it turns out he was posting photos of me while we were still dating, but I didn't find out about that until years later. That was just a whole other layer of violating my trust.
At some point, you go to the police, and you do that not once, but twice.
Yeah. 2
different police agencies in North Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get any satisfaction or help from the police?
No. The first time I really didn't. I think they took my complaint and just kind of filed it away. I didn't get any responses from them as far as doing an investigation or anything like that. And so I went another, I think, 2 years. And then I was getting more notifications that, oh, hey, I'm seeing these photos again, and this is you. Did you know about this? And I knew it had happened before. I didn't know it was happening still, or that anything was still up. So I went to the police again, and they kind of conducted an initial investigation, but because it's an internet crime, they weren't as well equipped or like knowledgeable, I guess, to really conduct like a thorough investigation.
At some point, did you leave your job as a school teacher?
Yes.
Why?
That initial feeling of panic from what's going to happen when I walk into work tomorrow after knowing that these are out there, that doesn't go away because they're still out there. They're still popping up. I'm getting notifications from people. And the thought that, okay, well, it didn't happen today doesn't put you at ease thinking that it's not going to happen. It's just the time before it comes to light is getting shorter and shorter. Like, it's going to happen any day now. It's going to happen any second that someone is going to pull me into the office and say, hey, like, what is this, basically?
Kenton, she just mentioned the notion of these things being out there and being out there forever. I know that as part of your legal work, you've managed to get the court to tell the defendant, the ex-boyfriend here, to get rid of these images and to continue to get rid of them in perpetuity.
Correct.
As Jane points out, though, they're out there. I mean, can you get rid of all of this stuff? Is there any way to get rid of, in our modern environment, to get rid of all of this stuff?
It's a very big challenge. The short answer probably is no. But what we can do is, number one, the defendant is obligated under the permanent injunction issued by the court to contact any website that has this material and request that it be removed on the basis that it was unlawfully published. These websites, most of them are located outside the United States. And so there's very little that we can do to compel them to remove this content. That being said, many of them will, particularly when we show them the court order. But, what we can do is we can continue to monitor the internet doing these searches. And so that even if the defendant doesn't take action to remove it, we can reach out on our own to try to get it removed. But there's no guarantee. And the nature of the internet is such that this material tends to propagate. And it's just extremely difficult to wipe it out for good. But we're going to do our best, and we're going to hold the defendant accountable for making sure that it doesn't continue to propagate as much as we can.
I've interviewed women who are victims of sexual assault. Is this a kind of sexual assault?
That's how it feels. And although it's not a physical assault on me, I mean, there is an element of exposure, violation, humiliation, whatever. It feels that way. And I think that was at first one of the things that kind of, I didn't know where to go because I didn't know if anyone or any entities would take this seriously because it wasn't a physical crime, if that makes sense. It's almost hard for me to say that, though, because it's like I understand that there are people out there who've experienced like a physical part of that. Like I almost want to downplay what happened.
You have at this point a verdict of $250,000. We don't know what the judgment will be. What are the odds of collecting against a defendant in one of these cases?
So in this particular case, the defendant is fairly young. He's in his 20s, I'm pretty sure. He doesn't have a lot of resources himself. However, the nature of this judgment is such that if he were to ever file bankruptcy, we can challenge the ability for him to discharge the judgment because this is done as an intentional tort. So the basic idea in bankruptcy law is if you're about to file bankruptcy because you're broke, you can't go beat somebody up, file bankruptcy and be like, oh, I don't have to pay your hospital bills. Tough luck, right? Because if you commit an intentional tort, which this is, that debt will follow you around forever. And so while he might be young now, Jane Doe can follow him with a collection attorney to pursue collection discovery, subpoenaing, his financial records, taking his deposition, occasionally to learn about his financial situation. But as soon as he has any money left over, she can essentially seize it. And so it will follow him until he either pays it off or he dies.
Can she go after his wages?
Not in Texas. Depends on where he is. Our understanding is that he's moved to Colorado, and I don't know Colorado collection law, but you can't do that. But it's going to be hard for him to move past square one in his life financially until this is paid off.
Your website describes you as someone who does law in the area of the internet. And it occurs to me that you deal in some really dark corners of the world, given what happened to Jane and what happens in your other cases.
Yes, we see a lot of ugly stuff.
Do you have any advice that you would give people, given what you saw in her case and in other cases?
There's a number of different things. First thing I'd say is you do want to contact an attorney as quickly as you can. And that's for a variety of reasons. Number one, there's a statute of limitations to bring these claims. Number two, a lot of the internet evidence that's out there where we can subpoena a website to figure out what the IP address is that the content was posted from. That evidence is often perishable. They keep those logs for maybe 6 months, sometimes a year, depends on the website. And so you have to go down that path by issuing subpoenas, and it's a lengthy process. And if you're too late, that evidence may be gone. Number three is, do know that if you are sharing intimate photos with somebody, number one, and they breach that trust, it's not your fault. This is something that happens very routinely in our society right now. And it is reasonable to expect somebody that you share this with to keep it private. And that's why we have the laws to protect that now. That being said, you also need to consider what can happen if you do share these photos. Because number one, even though you may like this person, things could get ugly at some point, and they may post it out of revenge, even though it's illegal.
There's all sorts of ways this stuff can get out. Sure.
Yeah, you have people that potentially could hack your phone. That doesn't happen very much. People it's a common defense that you see, like, oh, my phone must have been hacked. The photos magically appeared on the internet. Theoretically could happen, but in actuality doesn't happen very often. But I mean, their strategy was slut shaming, right? It's a strategy I don't think was the right strategy to go with, but we're just like, yeah, go up. I mean, go for it, right? The jury's going to hate you. And they did. Yeah,
right. You weren't going to Sun Tzu, don't get in your enemy's way when he's destroying himself.
Right.
Yeah.
First of all, you're getting asked questions to tell your side of the story, but then there's that cross-examination by the other side that's telling you all the things that, first of all, blame me as the victim for, okay, no, you really did this. But also just, like, if I can just say it, like slut shaming, basically trying to paint me as this person that wanted this to happen, or that how could I think that this wasn't going to happen? Basically putting all the blame on me for it. And so, yeah, just a super emotional 4 days and being on the stand for like several hours. And then, when the trial was over and then I heard that the jury wanted to come meet with me, oh my gosh, like tears. Like they all came up and hugged me, and they were saying like, oh, it's so not your fault. Like, and we knew it. And it was just like, it was really like a really genuinely sweet moment.
After the jury rendered its verdict and was discharged, several members of the jury came into the courtroom and met with Jane Doe and hugged her. Because, trial it's kind of an intense moment. We were there for 4 days, and you kind of bond with the jury a little bit, even though they're not saying anything to you, but they're all experiencing this trial with you. The many members of the jury wanted to express their sympathy with Jane and to, assure her that she did nothing wrong and she's in the right here.
Do you have any advice for, I'm going to say young women, because I think young women are more often victims of this? Tell me if I'm wrong.
So on that, I think generally yes, but I do know that there is a rising instance of what's called sextortion, which is where there was recently an article on CNN about this, but basically where somebody goes and reaches out to a young man, pretends that they are a girl and says, hey, look, let's start dating, whatever. They share an intimate photo with him. They ask them to just share one in return. And then they take that and say, unless you pay me X amount of money, I'm going to publish this online. And apparently young men are more victims of that than young women. Women likely are probably more likely to be victims of revenge porn, where it's, an ex-boyfriend going and publishing this material. So it does affect everybody.
Okay. Well, I've learned something and I appreciate that. Do you have any advice for people just generally? And again, I hate to ask that because it somewhat puts the onus on you, and I don't want to blame the victim. But having been through all of this, do you have something you would tell the rest of us?
I think the biggest thing is that it's worth pursuing, that it's not this completely hopeless thing that happens to you and you just have to live with it. And, however it comes back on you, it's not your fault.
In the filing, when you've, I think, first find the images, it sounds like you go to him and say, what the heck is this about? Because his mom knows about it.
I found out, it's like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock on whatever school night, day of the week that it was. I immediately know who it is because there's only one possible explanation. It's the person who I sent it to. So when the first thing I do is I'm like, I'm on the phone with my friend who tells me about it. I need to see it. Can you send it to me? Or is it still on? He sends me a screenshot. And okay, I have to go. So then I call my ex-boyfriend at the time. And we haven't spoken in 6 months. We haven't seen each other in 6 months. I call him, he doesn't answer. So I call him a couple times, he doesn't answer. And I'm freaking out. So I go to his house because I know he lives with his parents. And I go to his house and confront him about it. And he admits, yeah, I did this, and won't really give me any other explanation as to why. But yes, his mom, of course, finds out because she's the one who answers the door. I say, look, I need to talk to him. And she finds out because she's there when I confronted him about what he did.
And she sends you a note.
Yes. So she reaches out to me on Facebook, I think a few days later, and kind of apologizes on his behalf. I thought we raised him better than that, something along those lines.
Was this guy posting these images for fun? Was he posting them for money?
So he wasn't, to my knowledge, posting them for money. There was no, he wasn't getting any money from them. In one instance of the postings that we saw in this thread, it was he was trading photos of me with these other anonymous people on the internet. It would be one thread. Hey, here's a photo of my girlfriend, I think is what it says. Let me know what you think. People comment, and they were rating me on the photo. And then he was saying, yeah, something about rate, and I'll give her a rating and I'll give you more. He would rate them. He would post another photo. And then these people in response to that would post photos of their girlfriends asking okay, well, I showed you mine, you show me yours. So it made me feel sick, kind of to my stomach, that there's people that are just trading these photos of women that, at least in my instance, he has a relationship with me at this time. And then you just see a whole thread of people doing that same thing. We're just little trading cards of hey, look at what I have. Can I see what you have too? And then that added layer of rating us on a scale of 1 to 10. It's just uncomfortable and eye-opening, I guess.
I want to thank you for explaining the legal points. I want to thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. I know it isn't easy, and I appreciate you doing that. And I think our listeners appreciate you doing that too. So thanks. That was internet law trial attorney Kenton Hutcherson and his client, Jane Doe. To all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Remember, you can write in questions for our next guest on any of our social media channels. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more information about each episode. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and tune in next time to keep it legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. See you then.